Before the coffee hit the floor, before the papers scattered across the mahogany desk, before the room of 12 men fell into a silence so thick it pressed against the walls, a voice that had no business being there said the one thing no one had ever dared to say. Maybe if you weren't so afraid of being loved, you wouldn't need all these people to be afraid of you instead. The cup shattered. The coffee bled across contracts worth $14 million. But Kiro Valente did not look at the mess. He looked at the woman who had caused it. The clumsy girl who had lasted exactly 11 minutes in his office before destroying his morning and exposing something he had buried for 39 years. She stood frozen, her hand still outstretched where the cup had slipped, her eyes wide with the horror of someone who had just realized their mouth had operated without permission from their brain. But the second thing she said was worse. "I'm sorry. You looked so lonely sitting there, and I know what that feels like." 27 secretaries had come before her. Not one had lasted the week. And yet somehow, this one had just seen straight through him in under 15 minutes. The Valente building sat on the corner of Laurelton and Ninth, a black glass tower designed by an architect who understood exactly one thing: intimidation. It rose 14 stories above the street, reflecting nothing but sky on its surface, as if the building itself refused to acknowledge the city around it. Inside, the floors were marble. The walls were gray. The artwork was abstract and expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. Every corridor had been engineered to amplify footsteps, to make visitors feel the weight of their own arrival long before they reached any door. The 12th floor belonged to Kiro alone. His office occupied the entire eastern wing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, but the blinds were almost always drawn. The furniture was leather and chrome, positioned with geometric precision. There were no photographs on the desk, no personal effects on the shelves. The only indication that a human being occupied this space was a single espresso cup that appeared each morning at 7:15 and was removed, empty, by 7:40. The staff called it the ice floor. They spoke about it the way medieval villagers might have spoken about a dragon's lair, with fear, with fascination, with a strange respect for something that could destroy them without effort. Secretaries were assigned to the 12th floor the way soldiers were assigned to the front lines. It was not a promotion, it was a test. One that no one had passed in over 2 years. The last one had quit after 3 days. The one before her had lasted 4. There had been one who made it to Friday afternoon before walking out without a word, leaving her badge on the reception desk and her dignity somewhere on the elevator ride down. The 12th floor did not break people with cruelty. It broke them with silence, with expectation, with the crushing weight of proximity to a man who had forgotten how to be human. Or perhaps, a man who had never been allowed to learn. Marin Thorne had not planned to become a secretary. She had planned to become a veterinarian. She had planned to spend her life healing animals in a small clinic with green walls and a garden out back, where recovering dogs could lie in the sun. She had planned a lot of things that no longer existed. The plan had died 18 months ago, along with her mother. Now she stood in the elevator of the Valente building, clutching a folder of documents she did not fully understand, wearing a blazer she had borrowed from a thrift store, trying to remember how to breathe. She was 26 years old. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back in a bun that was already losing strands around her temples. Her eyes were a pale blue that looked gray in certain light, and right now, in the fluorescent glow of the elevator, they looked like storm clouds. She had bitten her lower lip so many times in the last hour that it had started to swell. Her hands were her biggest problem. They had always been clumsy, nervous, prone to dropping things at precisely the wrong moment. As a child, she had broken more dishes than anyone in her family could count. As a teenager, she had knocked over a display case at a museum and been banned for life. As an adult, she had learned to keep her hands occupied at all times, holding something, gripping something, pressing her palms flat against surfaces to keep them from betraying her. But today, her hands had nothing to hold except a folder. And the folder was already trembling. She needed this job. Not wanted. Needed. The distinction mattered more than anyone watching her would ever know. Her mother's medical bills had not disappeared with her mother's death. They had multiplied. The hospital wanted $47,000. The hospice wanted another 12. The funeral home had been kind enough to offer a payment plan, but the payments were still due, still arriving in envelopes that Maren had started hiding in a drawer because looking at them made her feel like the walls of her apartment were pressing inward. She had sold everything she could sell: her mother's car, her mother's jewelry, the small watercolor painting that had hung above the fireplace since Maren was 9 years old, the one with the lighthouse and the gray sea that her mother had bought on their only vacation together. She had moved from a one-bedroom apartment to a studio. From the studio to a room she rented from a woman named Dottie, who raised parakeets and smelled like lavender and cigarette smoke. The room had a mattress on the floor and a window that looked onto an alley, and a lock on the door that Maren checked every night, 3 times, before she could sleep. And still, it was not enough. She had applied to 43 jobs in 4 months: secretary, receptionist, administrative assistant, data entry clerk. Anything that did not require a degree she had been forced to abandon when her mother's diagnosis had arrived like a bomb in the middle of her 3rd year. 42 rejections. 42 versions of, "We have decided to move forward with another candidate," or "Your qualifications do not quite match our needs," or simply nothing at all. Just silence. Just the slow suffocation of being invisible in a world that required visibility to survive. And then the 43rd application had been answered. By the Valenti Group. For a position on the 12th floor. A position that paid more in 1 month than Maren had made in the last 6 combined. She had not asked why the pay was so high. She had not researched the company beyond the basics. She had simply said yes, because yes was the only word left in her vocabulary that led anywhere other than backward. The elevator doors opened. The 12th floor stretched before her like a held breath. Maren stepped out. Her heel caught on the gap between the elevator and the floor. She stumbled, caught herself on the wall, and dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the marble like startled birds. She crouched to gather them, her face burning, her hands shaking, and that was when she heard the voice behind her. "You must be the new one." It was not a question. It was not a greeting. It was an observation delivered in a tone that suggested the observer had already made several conclusions, none of them favorable. Maren looked up. A man in a charcoal suit stood at the end of the corridor. He did not move to help her. He simply watched, the way a hawk watches something small moving through a field. She had 11 minutes left before she would accidentally see straight through him. She just did not know it yet. Maren had not always been alone. There had been a time, not so long ago, when her life had resembled something close to ordinary. She had grown up in a yellow house on Calder Street, in a neighborhood where people still waved from their porches and brought casseroles when someone was sick. Her mother, Lenora, had worked as a seamstress for a bridal shop downtown. Her father had left before Maren's 2nd birthday, a detail she knew only from the single photograph her mother kept in a drawer but never displayed. He had dark hair. He was smiling. That was all Maren knew of him, and after a while, she stopped wondering. Lenora had been enough. More than enough. She had been the sort of mother who left notes in lunchboxes and slow danced in the kitchen to songs on the radio and cried at every school play, even the terrible ones. She had worked 60-hour weeks so Maren could take piano lessons. She had sold her own car so Maren could attend the state university. She had given and given and given until there was almost nothing left of herself to give. And then, in the spring of Maren's 3rd year of college, Lenora had called with news that changed the shape of everything. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctor had used the word aggressive 3 times in a single sentence. Marin had dropped out within the week. She had moved back to the yellow house on Calder Street and become something she had never planned to be. A caretaker. A witness. A daughter watching her mother disappear 1 pound at a time. The next 12 months had been a slow unraveling. Hospice visits, medication schedules, nights spent sleeping in a chair beside her mother's bed because Lenora was afraid of the dark and Marin was afraid of everything else. There had been a moment, near the end, when Lenora had grabbed Marin's wrist with a strength that should not have existed in a body so diminished. "You are going to be okay," Lenora had whispered. "Promise me you will be okay." Marin had promised. She had said the words with her mother's hand in hers and tears running down her face, and the certain knowledge that she was lying. Because how could she be okay? How could anyone be okay after watching the only person who had ever truly loved them vanish into a hospital bed? Lenora had died on a Tuesday. The sun had been shining. Birds had been singing outside the window. And Marin had sat beside the body for 3 hours before she could bring herself to call anyone, because calling someone meant admitting it was real. The funeral had been small. 14 people. A minister who mispronounced Lenora's name twice. A reception at the Yellow House where neighbors brought casseroles that Marin could not eat and offered condolences that felt like sandpaper against her skin. And then, they had left. All of them. One by one, the visitors stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. The world moved on because that is what worlds do, even when the people inside them cannot. Marin had sold the Yellow House 2 months later. She had stood in the empty living room where she had learned to walk, where she had opened Christmas presents, where she had danced with her mother to songs on the radio, and she had felt something inside her go quiet. Not broken. Quiet. The way a radio goes quiet when you drive too far from the station. Still playing, but nothing coming through. She had been alone ever since. The numbers told a story that Marin could not escape. 47,000 to the hospital, 12,000 to the hospice, 8,000 to the funeral home, still outstanding, 3,000 to the credit card she had used to buy groceries during those 12 months when working had been impossible. Another 2,000 in small debts that had accumulated like snow during a long winter. $72,000. That was the shape of her cage. She had done the math so many times that the numbers lived inside her like a second heartbeat. She knew exactly how many months she could survive on her current trajectory. She knew which bills could be delayed and which ones would trigger consequences. She knew the names of the collection agents who called every Tuesday and Thursday, their voices professionally patient, and their questions designed to remind her that she was failing. The room she rented from Dottie cost $400 a month. Utilities included. No lease, just a handshake, and an envelope of cash on the first of every month. Dottie did not ask questions. Dottie had her own ghosts, her own drawers full of unopened envelopes, her own reasons for renting rooms to strangers who paid in cash. Marin ate once a day, sometimes twice, if there was bread left from the day before. She had learned to make a box of pasta last a week. She had learned which grocery stores discounted items at 9 in the evening. She had learned to walk past restaurants without looking at the menus in the windows, because looking only reminded her of everything she could not afford. She had no car, no savings, no degree, no family, no emergency fund, no safety net of any kind. The Valenti job was not an opportunity. It was oxygen. The difference between drowning and not drowning. The difference between next month's rent and the street. When the HR representative had told her the salary, Marin had asked her to repeat it. Twice. She had been certain there was a mistake. There was no mistake. The 12th floor paid well because the 12th floor destroyed people. It was hazard compensation disguised as a benefits package, But Marin did not care about hazards. She cared about $72,000. She cared about a quiet room and a door that locked. She cared about surviving long enough to figure out what survival even meant anymore. So she had signed the contract. She had borrowed the blazer. She had stood in that elevator with her trembling hands and her borrowed confidence. And she had walked onto the 12th floor carrying nothing but desperation dressed up as courage. Piero Valente had been 19 years old the first time he killed a man. He did not remember the man's face. He remembered other things. The weight of the pistol. The smell of gunpowder mixing with rain. The way his hand had not trembled. Not once, because trembling was a luxury his father had beaten out of him years before. He was 51 now, broad across the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes were gray-green and carried the flat quality of a man who had learned very early not to show what he felt. His hair was dark, cut short, and there was a thin scar along the base of his left ear that most people never noticed because most people did not look at Hero Valente long enough to see it. His father's name had been Enzo. He had run the Valente organization for 31 years, and he had raised his only son the way one raises a weapon. With discipline, with pressure, with the systematic removal of everything soft. Piero's mother had died in childbirth. This was the first fact of his existence. He had entered the world by taking someone out of it. His father had reminded him of this often, not with cruelty, but with cold instruction. "You came into this life owing a debt," Enzo would say. "Everything you do must pay it back." There had been no childhood. Not in any meaningful sense. There had been lessons, languages, combat training. Negotiations observed from the corner of rooms where men decided who would live and who would disappear. Kiro had learned to read a contract before he learned to read a storybook. He had learned to spot a lie in a man's eyes before he learned to ride a bicycle. Enzo had not been abusive in the way that word is typically understood. He had never struck Hero in anger. He had never raised his voice. He had simply constructed a world in which love was transactional, and softness was a defect, and the only acceptable emotion was control. When Ciro was 12, he had found a stray dog behind the warehouse on Delancey Street. A mutt with brown eyes and a torn ear, and a tail that wagged despite everything. He had fed it scraps for 2 weeks. He had named it Santo. On the 15th day, Enzo had discovered the arrangement. He had not yelled. He had simply taken Kiro to the warehouse and handed him a pistol. "Attachment is weakness," Enzo had said. "Weakness gets people killed. Not just you. Everyone who depends on you. Do you understand?" Kiro had understood. He had pulled the trigger. And something inside him had learned to build walls so high that nothing would ever get close enough to require killing again. By 19, he was his father's right hand. By 25, he had expanded the organization into 3 new territories. By 30, when Enzo died of a heart attack at a restaurant in Palermo, Ciro had inherited an empire that stretched across 2 continents. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He had properties in 6 countries. He had lawyers and accountants and soldiers and politicians who returned his calls within minutes. And he had not been touched by another human being with kindness in longer than he could remember. Not touched in anger. That happened occasionally. Business required certain demonstrations, but touched without transaction. The simple human act of contact that expected nothing in return. That had not happened since before the dog, since before the warehouse, since before he had learned that letting anyone close meant giving them the power to destroy you. His staff feared him. His associates respected him. His enemies avoided him. But no one knew him. No one had seen behind the architecture of control he had spent 39 years constructing. He preferred it that way. Or he had convinced himself he preferred it. The distinction had long since ceased to matter. The secretaries were a formality, a concession to the legitimate side of his business. the real estate holdings and import companies that provided a clean face for everything underneath. He needed someone to manage his calendar, answer his phones, and organize the paperwork that kept the legal world satisfied. But he did not need them to stay. In fact, he preferred when they left. Their fear confirmed what he already knew about himself. Their departure proved that the walls were working. 27 secretaries in 2 years. 27 people who had looked at him and seen exactly what he wanted them to see. A monster. A machine. Something not quite human. And then the 28th had arrived. The one with the borrowed blazer and the trembling hands and the folder of papers scattered across his marble floor. He had watched her from the end of the corridor. He had expected the usual response, the stammered apology, the averted gaze, the immediate visceral understanding that she did not belong here. But when she had looked up at him, something strange had happened. Something that had not happened in 39 years. She had seen him. Not the empire, not the reputation, not the carefully constructed armor of silence and distance. She had looked at his face and seen something underneath it. Something he had worked his entire life to hide. And then, 11 minutes later, standing in his office with coffee bleeding across $14 million in contracts, she had said it out loud. Maybe if you weren't so afraid of being loved, you wouldn't need all these people to be afraid of you instead. Ciro Valente had not moved. He had not spoken. He had simply stood there, feeling the walls he had built for 39 years tremble for the first time. Because the clumsy girl with the borrowed blazer had just done something that 27 secretaries, 100 business rivals, and 3 decades of isolation had failed to do. She had found the door. The silence in Ciro's office lasted exactly 14 seconds. Marin counted them. She counted because counting was something to do other than dissolve into the floor, which was what every cell in her body was begging her to do. The coffee dripped from the edge of the desk onto the marble. The contracts beneath it were already ruined, the ink bleeding into brown puddles that spread like small disasters across the pages. Marin's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I am so sorry," she finally managed. "I did not mean to say that. I do not know why I said that. I have a condition where my mouth operates independently from my brain, and I swear it has never been this bad before, but sometimes when I am nervous I just say things and I cannot stop them, and please do not fire me because I really need this job, and I will pay for the contracts, and I know they are probably worth more than my entire life, but I will figure something out, and I am so sorry." She had not taken a breath. Not once. The entire apology had emerged as a single continuous exhale that left her light-headed and trembling. Cairo still had not moved. He stood behind his desk like a statue carved from something colder than stone. His gray-green eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to back toward the door. But she did not back toward the door. She stayed. Because staying was all she knew how to do anymore. "The contracts," Kiro said slowly, "are replaceable." His voice was low, controlled. The sort of voice that did not need to raise itself to command attention. "The coffee cup," he continued, "belonged to my father. It was handmade in Palermo in 1973. It is not replaceable." Marin looked at the shattered pieces on the floor. White ceramic with a thin blue line around the rim. Fragments now. Scattered like broken teeth across the marble. "I will find another one," she said. "I will look everywhere. I will call every antique dealer in Sicily. I will learn Italian if I have to. I will fix this." She did not know why she was still talking. She did not know why she was making promises she could not possibly keep. But something in his face had shifted when she mentioned the cup. Something almost imperceptible. A flicker behind the ice. "Why did you say it?" Kiro asked. "Say what?" "That I am afraid of being loved." The question hung in the air like smoke. Marin felt her face flush. Her hands twisted together in front of her, fingers interlacing and releasing in a nervous rhythm she could not control. "I do not know," she admitted. "I just looked at you, and I saw someone sitting alone in a room designed to keep everyone out. And I recognized it. Because I have been building rooms like that too. Just smaller ones, made of different materials." She paused. Her voice dropped. "It takes one to know one, I guess." Kiro studied her for a long moment. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture changed. The rigidity softened by a single degree. The walls shifted by a single inch. "Clean up the cup," he said finally. "Carefully, every piece. Put them in the top drawer of the credenza behind you. Do not throw them away." Marin blinked. "You want me to save the broken pieces?" "I want you to save the broken pieces." She knelt on the marble floor and began gathering the fragments with trembling fingers. The blue line on the rim was still visible on some of them. A thin thread of color that had survived the fall. Behind her, Cairo sat down at his desk and began moving the ruined contracts aside without looking at them. $14 million in negotiations, pushed to the corner like yesterday's newspaper. He watched the clumsy girl collect the pieces of his father's cup. And for reasons he could not explain, he did not tell her to leave. The first week passed. Marin did not leave. She arrived each morning at 6:45, 15 minutes before she was required, because punctuality felt like the only thing she could control. She organized files with a precision that surprised even her. She answered phones in a voice that grew steadier with each call. She made coffee without spilling it, though she gripped the cup with both hands every time she carried it, her knuckles white with concentration. Cairo noticed everything. He noticed the way she mouthed words silently before speaking to clients, rehearsing sentences to ensure they emerged correctly. He noticed the way she flinched when doors slammed, a tiny involuntary movement that she tried to hide by adjusting her hair. He noticed the way she ate lunch at her desk, always the same thing. A small container of rice and vegetables that she portioned carefully, as if measuring each bite against some invisible budget. He noticed, and he said nothing, because noticing was not the same as caring. Noticing was simply observation, data collection, the habit of a man who had survived by understanding the weaknesses of everyone around him. But something else was happening too, something he had not anticipated. She noticed him back. On the fourth day, she had looked up from her desk as he passed and said, without preamble, "You have not eaten today." He had stopped walking. "Excuse me?" "You had coffee at 7:15, nothing since. It is almost 2. Your hands are shaking slightly when you sign documents. Low blood sugar, probably." She had returned to her typing as if she had commented on the weather. On the 6th day, she had placed a small wrapped package on his desk before he arrived. Inside was a ceramic cup, white with a thin blue line around the rim. Not identical to the one she had broken, but close. Remarkably close. The note attached said only, "I could not find the exact one, but I tried. I hope the pieces still matter more than the replacement." He had not thanked her. He had not acknowledged the gift at all. But he had placed it on the shelf beside his window, where the morning light caught the blue line and made it glow. On the 8th day, she had stayed late. He had emerged from a meeting at 9 in the evening expecting an empty floor and found her still at her desk, typing something that was clearly not work-related. "You should go home," he said. "I do not want to go home," she replied without looking up. "Why not?" She stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, he thought she would not answer. But then she spoke, and her voice carried a weight he recognized, the sound of someone who had been holding something alone for too long. "Because home is a room I rent from a woman who raises parakeets, and the walls are thin. And at night I can hear her crying in the kitchen, and it reminds me of my mother, and I am not ready to hear that sound yet. So I stay here, where it is quiet, where no one is crying. She looked at him finally. Why are you still here? The question should have been impertinent. It should have triggered the automatic dismissal he had perfected over decades. But instead, Cairo found himself answering, because home is a penthouse with 7 rooms, and the walls are thick. And at night, I cannot hear anything at all, and the silence reminds me that there is no one left to make any sound. So I stay here, where there are footsteps in the hallway, where someone might still knock on the door. They looked at each other across the dim office, 2 people who had built fortresses of solitude and somehow found themselves standing at the same gate. Marin smiled. It was small, tentative, barely a movement of her lips. We are both terrible at being alone, she said, and somehow also terrible at not being alone. Kiro did not smile. He had forgotten how. But something in his chest shifted. A door opening in a hallway he had sealed off decades ago. Go home, he said again, but softer this time. The crying will stop eventually, and when it does, the silence will be worse. Trust me on that. She gathered her things. She walked toward the elevator, and just before the doors closed, she turned and said, "Thank you for not pretending you do not understand." The doors slid shut. Kiro stood alone on the 12th floor, and for the first time in years, he wished someone had stayed. 3 weeks in, the first envelope arrived. Marin found it on her desk when she returned from delivering documents to the 7th floor. Plain white. No return address. No postage. Someone had placed it there by hand. Inside was a photograph of the yellow house on Calder Street. Her mother's house. Her house once. The house she had sold to strangers over a year ago. On the back, written in red ink, "We know where you came from. We know where you are. 72,000. You have 14 days. Her hands shook so badly the photograph fell from her fingers. It landed face up on her desk, the yellow siding bright against the dark wood, and Marin felt the walls of the office close inward like a fist. She had known the debt collectors were aggressive. She had known they were growing impatient. But this was something else. This was not a phone call or a letter. This was a threat delivered in person to a building that required security clearance to enter. Someone had walked into the Valente building. Someone had found her desk. Someone had placed this envelope while she was gone and walked out again without being stopped. She was still staring at the photograph when Kiro's voice came from behind her. "What is that?" She jumped. Her elbow caught the edge of a coffee cup and sent it spinning toward the floor. Kiro caught it. One hand, no effort, reflexes trained by decades of catching things before they could cause damage. He set the cup down. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made his expression change. "Show me," he said. It was not a request. Marin handed him the photograph. He read the words on the back. His jaw tightened. A muscle moved beneath the skin of his temple. "Who do you owe money to?" "Everyone." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Hospital, hospice, funeral home, credit cards. I have been paying what I can, but it is not enough. And some of the accounts were sold to collection agencies, and I do not know which ones anymore because there are so many letters, and I stopped opening them because every time I open one I feel like I am drowning and I cannot breathe and I just—" She stopped. She pressed her hands against her eyes. "I am sorry. I should not be telling you this. This is not your problem. I will handle it. I will figure it out. I always figure it out." Kiro set the photograph on her desk. When he spoke, his voice was different. Lower. Colder. But the coldness was not directed at her. "How much exactly?" 72,000, give or take." "To how many creditors?" "I do not know. 5. Maybe 6. Some of the debts were bundled and sold. I lost track." Kiro was silent for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Vesper, I need a full trace on debt accounts held by Marin Thorne." Every creditor, every collection agency, every outstanding balance. And I need to know who walked into this building in the last 2 hours without proper clearance. Someone placed an envelope on the 12th floor. That should not be possible. He hung up without saying goodbye. Marin stared at him. You do not have to do this. I know. I cannot pay you back. Whatever you spend, I cannot possibly repay it. I know that too. Then why? Kiro picked up the photograph again. He looked at the yellow house with its ordinary windows and ordinary door and ordinary mailbox at the end of the driveway. The sort of house where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. Because 39 years ago, he said quietly, someone left a photograph on my father's desk. It was a picture of my mother's grave, a reminder that he had already lost everything soft, a message that said, we know what you love, and we know how to take it. And no one helped him. No one stopped the men who sent it. He handled it himself, and the way he handled it turned him into something that should not raise a child. He set the photograph down. I cannot undo what happened to him, or what he did to me, but I can make sure this does not turn you into something you are not meant to be. Marin felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. I am just a clumsy girl who dropped your father's cup, she whispered. Why do you care what happens to me? Kiro looked at her for a long moment. His face was still carved from stone. But somewhere behind his eyes, a boy named Kiro was remembering a dog named Santo, and the moment he learned that caring for something meant destroying it. Because you saw me, he said finally, and you did not run, and I do not know what to do with that. But I know I am not going to let anyone make you run either. Vesper Caldwell was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had worked for the Valenti organization for 23 years, specializing in problems that required disappearing. Not people, problems, debts, scandals, inconvenient paper trails. She made things vanish with the efficiency of a surgeon and the discretion of a priest. Within 48 hours, she had compiled a complete picture of Marin's financial catastrophe. 6 creditors, 4 collection agencies, 2 of which operated in legal gray zones that would make any judge uncomfortable. One of which had connections to a man named Whitford Gannett, who ran a small lending operation out of Meridian City and was known for intimidation tactics that occasionally crossed lines. Gannett had purchased Marin's hospital debt for pennies on the dollar. He had sent the photograph. He had walked into the Valenti building using credentials stolen from a maintenance contractor. And he had done it because he specialized in targeting people who had no one to protect them. He had chosen poorly this time. Ciro did not make phone calls. He did not send letters. He simply arranged a meeting. A quiet conversation in a warehouse on the east side of the city, where Gannett arrived expecting to negotiate and left understanding that Marin Thorne's debts had been purchased in their entirety by the Valenti Group, that she was no longer a viable target, and that any further contact with her would result in consequences that did not require elaboration. Gannett was a pragmatic man. He understood the mathematics of survival. He nodded once and never spoke Marin's name again. The remaining debts were settled within the week. Vesper handled the paperwork with her usual precision. Accounts were closed. Balances were zeroed. Collection calls stopped. The drawer full of unopened envelopes became irrelevant, a relic of a nightmare that had ended without fanfare. Marin learned about it on a Thursday afternoon. Ciro called her into his office and handed her a single sheet of paper. A summary. 6 accounts. All balances paid. Total settled. $74,612, including accumulated interest. She stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. I cannot accept this, she said. You already have. I did not ask for this. I know. That is why I did it. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I do not understand you. I have been here for 3 weeks. I broke your father's cup. I said the most inappropriate thing anyone has ever said to you. I spill things constantly. I am a disaster in heels. Why would you spend $75,000 on me? Kiro leaned back in his chair. For a moment he almost looked human. Tired, perhaps. Uncertain. Like a man who had just done something he could not fully explain to himself. When I was 12 years old, he said, I had a dog. For 2 weeks. His name was Santo. He was the only thing I ever loved without being afraid. And my father made me kill him to teach me that love was weakness. Marin's breath caught. I learned the lesson, Kiro continued. I built my life on it. I removed every person, every connection, and every possibility of attachment. I made myself into something that could not be hurt because it could not feel. And I told myself it was strength. He paused. But then you walked in here, and you looked at me, and you said I was afraid of being loved. And you were right. I have been afraid of it for 39 years, so afraid that I forgot what I was even protecting. He stood and walked to the window. The city stretched below, gray and indifferent. I am not trying to buy you. I am not trying to own you. I am trying to do something that my father would never have done, to protect someone without demanding anything in return. To see if the lesson he taught me was a lie. He turned back to face her. So you can accept it or not. You can stay or leave. But the debt is paid, and no one will threaten you again. That is not conditional. That is just true. Marin stood. She walked to where he stood by the window, and she did something no one had done in 39 years. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. It was light, brief, barely a touch at all. But Kiro froze like a man who had just felt the sun after decades underground. Thank you, she whispered. Not for the money, for telling me about Santo. She turned and walked back to her desk, and Ciro stood at the window, his arms still warm where her fingers had rested, feeling something stir in his chest that he had almost forgotten existed. It took him several minutes to recognize it. Hope. The weeks became months. Marin stayed. She was not perfect. She never became graceful. She spilled coffee at least twice a week. She knocked over a filing cabinet in November and sent 6 years of archived documents cascading across the floor like a paper avalanche. She once answered a call from a foreign diplomat and accidentally put him on hold for 45 minutes because she pressed the wrong button and could not figure out how to retrieve him. But she also remembered birthdays. Not just Kiro's, but the entire staff. She learned their names, their children's names, their anniversaries. She left small notes on desks, encouraging words, observations. You looked tired yesterday. Hope today is better. The presentation was excellent. You should be proud. The 12th floor began to change. The silence became less oppressive. The marble hallways echoed with occasional laughter. People lingered after meetings, talking about weekends and television shows and the small, ordinary details of human life. Cairo observed the transformation with something between confusion and fascination. He did not participate in the laughter. He did not linger after meetings. But he noticed that the air on his floor had shifted. Something had thawed. And the thawing had started with a clumsy girl who refused to be afraid of him. In December, Marin asked if she could put a plant in her office. A small one, just to add some color. Cairo said no. The next morning, there was a plant on his desk, a succulent in a blue ceramic pot. The note said, "You said no plants in my office. You did not say anything about yours. His name is Dante. Do not overwater him." Kiro did not remove the plant. He did not water it either, but he did not remove it. Marin watered it secretly when she thought he was not looking. He was always looking. In January, she convinced him to eat lunch outside his office for the first time in 7 years. They sat in the small courtyard behind the building, on a bench surrounded by trees that had lost their leaves but still held their shape against the winter sky. "It is cold," Cairo said. "It is fresh air. There is a difference. The difference is that fresh air is cold. Stop complaining. Eat your sandwich." He ate his sandwich. He did not complain again. But he did not admit, even to himself, that the cold air tasted like something he had forgotten. Freedom, perhaps, or permission. In February, Maren received a letter. Not from a collection agency. From the university she had left nearly 3 years ago. Her credits were still valid. If she wanted to return, she could complete her degree in 18 months. Part-time enrollment was available for working adults. She showed the letter to Ciro. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. "I could finish," she said. "I could become what I was supposed to become before everything fell apart. A veterinarian." "You remembered?" "I remember everything you tell me." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "If I went back to school," she said slowly, "I would need to reduce my hours here, or leave entirely. You would need to find another secretary." Kira was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something neither of them had named. "No," he said finally. Marin's face fell. "No," Ciro repeated. "I would not need to find another secretary. I would need to find another arrangement. Part-time hours, flexible scheduling, whatever allows you to finish your degree while remaining on this floor." He paused. 28 secretaries came before you. Not one of them lasted. Not one of them saw me as anything other than something to be afraid of. You broke my father's cup and told me I was afraid of love in the same breath. And then you stayed. You put a plant named Dante on my desk. You made me eat a sandwich in the cold. You turned my floor into something that almost resembles a workplace where human beings exist. He looked at her directly. "I am not willing to lose that. So we will find an arrangement. Because you are going to become a veterinarian, and you are going to do it without choosing between your future and this place." Marin's eyes filled with tears. She did not try to hide them. "You are nothing like they said you were," she whispered. "What did they say I was?" "A monster. A machine. Something not quite human." Kiro almost smiled. "Not quite. But almost. Perhaps I was. Perhaps I still am, in the ways that matter. But I am trying to be something else, and that is because of you." 1 year later, on a spring afternoon so clear the sky looked painted, Maren Thorne walked across a stage and received a degree she had never thought she would finish. She wore a blue dress beneath her graduation gown. Her mother's dress, saved from the yellow house before the sale. The one Lenora had worn to Marin's high school graduation 8 years earlier. It still smelled faintly of lavender. It still fit perfectly. The ceremony was held in an auditorium with high ceilings and wooden seats worn smooth by decades of graduates. There were speeches. There was applause. There were families crowding the aisles with cameras and flowers and proud, tearful faces. Marin had not expected anyone to come. She had purchased a single ticket for the family section and left it unused, a gesture toward a ghost, and a placeholder for someone who could not be there. But when she walked off the stage, diploma in hand, she saw him. Kiro Valente stood at the back of the auditorium, near the doors, as far from the crowd as possible while still being inside the building. He wore a dark suit. His hands were at his sides. His expression was unreadable. But he was there. Marin walked toward him, still holding her diploma, her eyes blurring with tears she did not try to stop. "How did you get in?" she asked. "I did not give you a ticket. I own the building." She laughed. It was wet and broken and real. "Of course you do." She stood before him. This man who had terrified an empire, who had built walls for 39 years, who had killed a dog named Santo because his father told him love was weakness, and she saw what she had always seen, not the monster, Not the machine. The boy behind the wall. Still watching. Still waiting for someone to find the door. "Thank you," she said, "for being here." Kiro nodded. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small box wrapped in blue paper. The same blue as the line on his father's cup. The same blue as the pot that held Dante the succulent. She opened it. Inside was a key. Silver. Simple. Attached to a small tag that read, Thorne Veterinary Clinic, 714 Calder Street. Marin stared at the address. Calder Street? Her mother's street? The street where the yellow house had stood. "The building next to where your mother's house was?" Gyro said. "It was a hardware store. It closed 2 years ago. I purchased it in January. Examination rooms. A surgery suite. A recovery area with windows that face a small garden where animals can lie in the sun." His voice was steady, controlled. But underneath it was not steady at all. "You said once that you wanted green walls and a garden." I was paying attention. Marin sat down on the nearest chair, diploma in one hand, key in the other, tears streaming down her face. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot possibly." "You can," Xero said. "And you will. Because this is not charity. It is investment. You changed the 12th floor. You changed how my staff looks at each other. You changed how I look at myself. That has value. This is recognition of that value." He paused. "And because my mother's name was Ileana, she died giving birth to me. I never knew her voice, her laugh, her face outside of photographs. But I imagine she would have wanted me to become the man who does things like this. So consider it a debt I am paying. Not to you, to her." Marin stood. She walked to where he stood, and she wrapped her arms around him. Kiro did not move. His body remained rigid, trained by decades of distance. But then, slowly, as if remembering a language he had not spoken since childhood, he raised his arms and placed them around her. It lasted 4 seconds. Maybe 5. But it was enough. When Marin pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "You are not afraid of being loved anymore," she said. "I am terrified," Xero replied. "But I am doing it anyway." She laughed. He almost smiled. And somewhere, the boy who had once loved a dog named Santo finally stopped hiding. 6 months later, Thorne Veterinary Clinic opened on Calder Street. The walls were green. The garden had a bench beneath a maple tree. The waiting room had a single photograph on the wall, a woman with honey-colored hair standing in front of a yellow house, smiling. Beneath the photograph, a plaque read, "For Lenora, who gave everything, and for those who taught me that giving does not have to mean disappearing." On opening day, a delivery arrived. No return address. Inside was a ceramic cup, white with a thin blue line around the rim, handmade in Palermo, an exact match. The note said, "The pieces still matter, but so does moving forward. Congratulations, Dr. Thorne. See." Marin placed the cup on her desk. She filled it with coffee, and she drank the entire thing without spilling a single drop. Outside, across the street, a dark car idled at the curb. Inside, a man in a wool coat watched the clinic doors open. He saw a woman in a white coat greeting her first patient, a nervous dog with brown eyes and a torn ear who reminded him of someone. Xero Valente put the car in drive, and the boy who had learned that love was weakness finally understood that his father had been wrong. Love was not weakness. Love was the only thing that lasted after everything else burned away. He drove into the spring light and did not look back, because looking back was for people who doubted what they had done, and Ciro had no doubts. Not about this.